There it is. Straight up from Seattle, being delivered here to Anchorage. Safe and sound, hopefully.
It's just a bag of no miles on it.
Woohoo!
Put this sticker on it. Watch out. Stay back.
Safe and sound. No damage.
Look it over. Make sure.
Yeah, it looks awesome. Perfectly fine.
All right. You never had to ride this thing?
Hi everyone, welcome to Mapache Moto. My name is Michelle, and this channel will be documenting the trip as I ride a motorcycle from Alaska all the way down to Argentina. Right now I'm at my home in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. I am originally from the United States, but I decided to move down here permanently a few years ago. I'll be going into much more detail at the end of this video as to my motivations behind the trip, but the short story is, in 2010, I rode a motorcycle from California, where I was living at the time, down to Guatemala and back over the course of about 2.5 months. It was the greatest adventure of my life, and even back then I had wanted to go all the way to Argentina, but I didn't have the time or the money available. Now I have the opportunity to do the whole trip, so I plan to take about 1.5 years to do it, although I'll be taking breaks along the way to come back home and edit videos. The bike I'll be using is a Honda CB500F. I actually bought it new in 2017, intending to do the trip back then, but life got in the way and the bike literally sat in my garage for 7 years, waiting to do the trip until now. I decided to name her Brisa, which means breeze in Spanish. Also coming along with me will be this little guy, who you might recognize as Boots or Botas in Spanish. He's the monkey from Dora the Explorer. The channel is named Mapache Moto. Mapache, which means raccoon in Spanish, is the name I give sometimes when I go into an ice cream shop or a coffee shop and they ask my name for the order. It's just a cute little name, and I thought it'd be a nice little name for the channel. So without further ado, Brisa has been shipped up to Anchorage. Both she and I and Botas are ready to start this trip. So I'll see you on the road. All right. This is day 1 of the trip. I left Anchorage about an hour ago, and I just got my first clear view of Denali, and let me tell you, that mountain is absolutely massive. Unbelievable. It looks like clouds at first. You think you're looking at a cloud, and and you realize it's a mountain, and it's impossibly high. It's probably gonna look really small in the camera, but it is monstrous. Wow, that is impressive. 20,320 feet. Just shooting up. Tonight's going to be just a short day for the first ride. I didn't want to do too much. So it's about 2.5 hours out of Anchorage to the place I'm going to stay, called McKinley View Lodge. So hopefully it lives up to its name and I get a good view of the mountain. It is 7:40, but sunset tonight is at about 11:45, so plenty of daylight left. Well, I'm at the McKinley View Lodge. They look closed, but there's a sign on the door with my name on it. And it does look like they have an amazing view of Denali. That was the end of the first day. It wasn't very long, just 2.5 hours out of Anchorage. At the end of every day, I'll have a map or I'll show you guys where I traveled during that video. So here we have a map of Alaska, and I just want to explain something first about Alaska, which I actually didn't know until starting this trip. So you see the whole huge state of Alaska, but there are there are no roads throughout almost the entire state. The only roads in Alaska are right here, kind of making a triangle, coming in from Canada down to Anchorage, and then up to Fairbanks, and then back. And then there's one additional road that goes north all the way to Dead Horse or Prudhoe Bay. And then one other road out of Anchorage that goes down through the Kenai Peninsula. But all of this land here, other than this road, has no roads at all. So people just fly between these towns here. So I didn't know that at all before starting this trip, and I found it pretty interesting to learn. Brisa was shipped up by sea to Anchorage, and I'm going to head up here, kind of not all the way to Fairbanks and then down this way. I don't really have much interest in taking this road up to Dead Horse. I know a lot of people do, but it's about 400 miles each way out and back of dirt and kind of sloshy, slippery mud that solidifies like concrete on the bike. So I'm not going to do that and kind of just do this loop here. So day one, first day of the trip, Brisa was shipped by sea up to Anchorage, and I left Anchorage and drove up here and to McKinley View Lodge, which was right about here. So not very far, but I didn't want to go very far on the first day anyway. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to follow the rest of the journey down to Argentina. At least you'll be able to find it again. And I hope to see you in the next video. So the rest of this video, the next 10 minutes or so, I am going to be going into much more detail as to my motivations behind the trip and how I came up with all this whole idea in the first place. So if you'd like to watch that, go ahead. Otherwise, the next video, I'll be getting right back into the riding and the travel again, and I'll see you there. So I've left Anchorage and plan to ride this motorcycle all the way to Argentina over the course of the next year and a half. Why would I want to do such a thing? What is my origin story, so to speak? So to back up, in 2010, I rode the motorcycle I had at the time from my home in California to Guatemala and back over the course of 2.5 months. I had wanted to go all the way to Argentina at that time, 14 years ago, but I didn't have the money saved up. I had some cats that I asked a couple of friends to watch for me. I was paying rent, and for all of those reasons, I needed a turnaround after that point. But I always vowed to myself, I promised myself that one day I would ride all the way to Argentina. At the time, I thought that would only be maybe a few years at most, and I'd be back on the road. And instead, one thing led to another, and it has become 14 years since that trip. And now, finally, I have this chance to go. So I'm fulfilling that promise I made to myself back then to finally do this trip. What got me started with this idea in the first place? I've spoken to some friends about it, and a lot of them have never even heard of this idea of riding a bike into foreign countries. Well, back in the late early 2000s, I had been going to a lot of presentations at REI for people that traveled, mostly backpacking around from country to country, and were just
learning so much about other cultures and having so many amazing experiences that I really wanted to have a similar experience in my life. However, with all of those presentations, they were all using buses to get from place to place, and because of that, they'd have to rely on the bus schedule and where the bus drove to and from, and have to go to the station and wait for it to arrive. And it seemed like that part of the trip was something that could really be improved on. And around that time, in late 2009, this movie came out called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And in the movie, towards the end, Brad Pitt's character takes off and rides a motorcycle around India. There's a montage of, it's not very long, like a couple minutes, but shows him riding. And that sense of freedom of being on a lonely road on a small bike just really, really resonated with me. And all of a sudden, a few months after that, something clicked. And I realized that it would be possible to have my own set of wheels, i.e. a motorcycle, and do these traveling experiences that I'd seen so many people give presentations on. Also at that time, loose gravel. Also at that time, bear with me. Whew, front wheel is sliding around. Also at that time, on the internet, I found a group of people that did exactly that. Horizons Unlimited, a group started by Grant and Susan, who themselves rode a bike around the world over the course of 10 years or so. So I just had everything I needed. I had no experience riding a motorcycle at that point, except for a small Honda CT110. I think the top speed was about 35 miles an hour. So in the summer of 2009, I decided I'd buy a bike. I found one on Craigslist and went to the guy that was selling it. And because I had no experience riding a bike, I didn't know how to use a clutch or shift, I couldn't test ride it. So I watched him ride it around the parking lot in front of me. It was a 1997 BMW F650, a dual carburetor, and watched him ride it around the parking lot and said, sure, yeah, I'll take it. I'd heard that BMWs were great bikes to have. Didn't know one way or the other if that was true or not. So I put it on the trailer, drove it home, and was so excited that later that evening into the night, I taught myself to ride it on the fire roads near my house that I was living. And from then on, I rode that bike everywhere I could, getting as much experience as I could, going camping trips on it in the California Sierras on the weekends, just doing as much riding as I could until the day would come when I could go on that trip myself. I was working for a startup at the time, which, as you know, startups are, tough to get going. And sure enough, about 10 months after that point, in April of 2010, the company laid off almost everybody, including myself. And I was thrilled. My manager actually at the time was really concerned when she was in the final meeting with me, saying, "Oh, are you going to be okay, Michelle?" And I had a big smile and I said, "Yes, I am planning to go to Mexico on my motorcycle," and was so excited that that day had finally come. I had printed out a big poster from one of the writers' blogs at the time that I found online of this site just over the border in Guatemala from Mexico, where it has these very, very steep hillsides, lush and green, the paved road winding off into down the canyon, one of those red and white radio towers that are pretty ubiquitous down there. And I printed that out in a large poster and had it on my wall, just staring at it and waiting for the day. So I didn't have a whole lot of money saved up, and carefully figured that I could afford to go for about 3 weeks before I'd have to come back and look for another job, which would give me enough time to dip into Mexico. I had a group of friends that were meeting up in Monterrey, Mexico, in a couple weeks' time. So I thought, great, I'll ride over to Monterrey and meet up with them and then head home. So I got everything ready. I got my pets dropped off at my friend's house and got the bike packed. And 10 days later, I was able to hit the road and start off in this trip. Well, on day one, I left the Bay Area and was riding down I-5 and thought to myself, you know what? I'd already been to Mexico many times, including on my motorcycle. Living in California, it wasn't so far of a drive, and I'd been there solo. I'd been there with friends on various trips, and I wanted to be able to say that I had gone beyond Mexico, like to the next country and back. And I thought, well, the stuff I have with me for a 3-week trip or a 3-month trip is the same. So why don't I just do that and keep going on the road? So I had to think for a moment, actually, what the next country was past Mexico. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Guatemala, pretty sure. And decided right there on the interstate that I would ride to Guatemala and back. So I stopped for gas, and a guy came up to me, saw the bike packed up with the luggage, and he said, hey, where are you going with the bike? And I said, I'm riding to Guatemala. And he looked at me and he's like, no, really, where are you going? And I said, no, really, I'm going to Guatemala. And he kind of gave a little frown and kind of walked away. And so I went in the store to pay and buy some snacks. And then this lady came up to me and she said, hi, I'm the wife of my husband out there who asked where you're going in your bike. And he's really curious where you're going, and he just wanted to know where it was. You said you were going to Guatemala or something. And I said, no, really, that is where I'm going. And her jaw, like, just about hit the floor. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're really serious? And I said, yeah. So then I just continued, and that trip, I wrote a blog at the time, which was kind of what people did. I will put a link in the description and right here down below, of course, so you can read through that if you like. And I went on that trip. It took about 2.5 months, and to this day, I think it was probably the greatest adventure I have ever done. Even though it consisted mostly of just mundane things of we're riding to a new town, finding a place to stay, finding a place to eat, just the whole adventure of it, being in this other culture and having to find out these things and figure out things along the road, things like my clothes are really dirty, where can I get them washed, was just fantastic. And when the day finally came on that trip to turn around and start pointing the nose of the bike north again and start heading back, I actually wrote myself a postcard in Guatemala and promised to myself at that time that someday I would be on the road again, and mailed it and had it on my fridge for years, actually, with the intent of one day fulfilling that promise to myself. This is the postcard I mailed myself, my future self, on the day that I had to turn around on the trip and start heading north again. Dear self, hope you had a great trip back. You're probably wishing it wasn't over so soon. Don't worry, you'll be back on that lonely road in the mountains soon. Best wishes, yourself from the past. A promise I made to myself, that one day I would return. It took 14 years, quite a lot longer than I ever thought it would, but here I am in Alaska, heading south to Argentina over the next 1.5 years. So now everything has aligned, and I am incredibly excited to finally do this trip. and I've left Anchorage. I had the bike shipped up from Seattle, and I'm heading south. And I plan to take about a year or a little longer than that to do the full trip. So I hope you follow along throughout the trip and whatever adventures might come my way. Thanks so much.